Tracie Wallace, and I'm a counselor here at CrossRoads Counseling Centers. And I want to share with you today one of the fascinating things that I studied in my counseling program that I also think is really helpful for clients and that I found helpful for myself, and that's about attachment. Now, when we use the word attachment, one way of understanding that is what type of pattern do you have for entering into relationships? And a lot of times people are familiar with that term as it concerns children, but I also think it's really helpful for adults. So one of the studies that I think does a really good job of explaining attachment styles is called the infant strange situation. And what the study does is observes babies in their first year of life growing up in their home and asks the question, what type of caregiving are they receiving? Are parents attuned? Are they responsive? Are they distant? Are they fearful to the child? And based on these observations, then when the child is 1 year old, they're brought into a play situation with their primary caregiver, usually mom. And the observer will take a look at what happens when mom leaves and then what happens when mom comes back. What does the child do? Because at that point, they will use whatever attachment system they have developed to make a connection with mom. And so from this study has been done over decades and in many countries around the world, and they have found the same results all around the world. And they've come up with 4 different attachment styles based on the study. And the first style is called secure attachment. And this is a child who, when mom leaves, the baby protests, and when mom comes back, the baby actively greets the child, is quickly soothed, and then can go back and play. And this child comes from a home, as you might expect, where the parents in general, not perfectly, but in general, are responsive to the child's needs. The second category is avoidant attachment. And this is a child that does not particularly care when mom leaves or when she comes back. And when they pair this with observations in the first year of life, this child grew up in a home where the parents in general are not responsive, and so the child learns to suppress their attachment system. Essentially, they really don't need anyone to take care of themselves. That's what they're coming to believe about themselves. The third type of attachment is called anxious or ambivalent attachment. And this child almost anticipates that mom's about to leave even before she goes. They're very anxious about it. When she comes back, they spend a long time with mom, and it takes them a very long time to be soothed before they can go back and return to play. And these children have grown up in homes where the parents are sometimes there and sometimes not, sometimes attuned and sometimes not. And so whereas the avoidantly attached child learns to suppress their attachment system, this child kind of has a hyperactive attachment system where they feel that they have to pay very close attention to what's going on in order to get their needs met. Then the fourth type of attachment is called disorganized attachment. And that is a child who really does not have a way of attaching when mom returns. So they might initially start to come up to mom, but then they're fearful, and then they pull back, and really they do not have a strategy for attaching. And these children grow up in the most severely abusive or neglectful homes. In fact, the research shows that 80% of adults who are in the highest risk categories have this type of childhood attachment. What is really interesting then is that sometimes the infant strange situation has been, the children in those studies have been followed into their adulthood to ask the question, what happens when this child grows into an adult? Do they keep this attachment style or not? And so what the research has shown there is that in the majority of cases, the securely attached 1-year-old turns into an adult with secure relationships. They know, they feel comfortable entering into relationships, they have good boundaries. The second type of attachment, the avoidant child, in general, in the majority of cases, turns into an adult who is aloof in their relationships. They're distant. They don't know how to engage their emotions. The anxiously or ambivalently attached 1-year-old turns into an adult who is anxious in their relationships, and they feel that they have to work very hard to keep them going, and people are never quite sure how to read them. The disorganized attached 1-year-old then turns into an adult in most cases that significantly struggles in their relationships. And that is the saddest of the 4 categories. Now, I said this was helpful and hopeful, so that might sound discouraging. That might sound determinative, that if you grow up in this type of home, that you are destined to turn into this type of adult. And another person did a study on top of that I think this is the hopeful part. It has shown that that is really not quite true. In a majority of cases, it does seem to turn out that way, but what he found in his research, his name is Dan Siegel, what he found is that it is not how you grew up, but how you made sense of the way you grew up that determines the types of relationships you'll enter into as an adult. And so for someone who deeply buries their pain and is not able to walk into their story and make sense of what has happened to them, then they will go on to perpetuate the type of attachment that they received in the majority of cases. But for someone who does the hard work of entering into their story, understanding the brokenness that has happened to them, the brokenness within them, they then have the capacity to make different choices. They can be a different kind of parent. They can enter into intimate relationships in a different way than what they observed. And so that's where I think attachment is so helpful and factors in so well into what we emphasize here at CrossRoads, that a huge part of my job as a counselor is to help people enter deeply into their stories. Not for the sake of blaming someone in the past or for the sake of focusing upon the past, but helping them in the present and offering them hope for the future.